part of the share use repair initiative. A little bit of background on us. Ooh, just need to advance my slides. There we go. We are a charity on the Make Way share platform, and our mission is to create a robust sharing, reuse, and repair sector that's both a waste and climate solution, enables all people to live well within their household budgets, and supports the development of more sustainable and just local economies. And I want this session to, ideally, we get into some discussion at the end, and it's not just me talking at you. I'm sure you're absorbing a ton of info already today. So to start off, I wanted to hear from you all what words come to mind when you hear circular economy. So if you go to menti.com and put in that code, you can type in some words that you think of when you think of a circular economy, because I know for a lot of folks, circular economy doesn't, when they hear it, it doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot if they haven't heard it before, right? It's not necessarily a colloquial term. All right.
Please feel free to speak up, anyone. And if you're shy, please do enter.
Yeah.
We'll pay attention to chats, and I can always verbalize it for you if you prefer, but do speak up. It's interactive.
Let's see if this,
and always remember,
I've had mixed results with this working, so I'll also bring it up online so I can make sure that we can see it.
It benefits everyone, right? That's what they're explaining.
It's Cradle.
And yeah, definitely put stuff in the chat as well. Okay, so I'm gonna just switch my share so we can start seeing what folks are putting in. Okay, so we've got zero waste, minimal waste, washing machine, designing out waste, design thinking, repurposing, beautiful. Oh, so many amazing things coming in here. Yeah, let's actually move this so we can see it a little bit bigger. All right. Cradle to cradle, eco-effectiveness in the chat. Amazing. All right. So we're all at least on the same page of, we have an idea of where we're going with circular, right? There's something about waste. There's something about our products, how we're looping them back in different ways. Of course, with a name like Share Use Repair Initiative, we give some hints on some words that we definitely think are associated there. But yeah, let me head back to where I was presenting before. Okay, great. All right. So I think before we can talk about the circular economy, we have to sort of talk about what our current economy is like. And so you might have heard already about this linear economy, the take, make, use, and waste. And I really like to also differentiate the recycling economy, because we've been talking about recycling for decades, and people will often refer to it as a successful education program for the environment. But realistically, we are still creating a ton of waste. And now there are lots of reports that have come out now in the last year that are saying there's so many things we've been recycling that were never really recyclable in the first place. And it was almost a bit of a PR stunt there. So the reason that where I start with this is I have an environmental background. And when we're looking at our economy in general, we've crossed critical planetary boundaries where, we're putting tons of emissions into the air, but we're also looking at biodiversity losses. Our land is being converted. There's the nitrogen and phosphorus loading in farming is nuts right now. And we're also not meeting the needs of people either. So what is our economy actually accomplishing then if we're not centering the well-being of people or planet? What is being centered there, right? And so sometimes I have to think, how did we get here in the first place? And I like to tell a couple stories around this. So two of these stories I heard through the Planet Money podcast around physical and psychological obsolescence. So one of these stories is about light bulbs, the Phoebus cartel. So this picture, it's called the Centennial Light. it's a light bulb that's still burning in California, and it's been burning for over 100 years. If I'm correct, I think it's around 130 years. You might be wondering, why don't all of our light bulbs burn that long? That's because of the Phoebus cartel. Some light bulb companies from across the world got together and realized they were hitting a point in innovation in light bulbs where they would no longer be able to sell them because they were lasting so long. So they got together and set a standard of how long they would want their light bulbs to last so people would keep on buying them, thus creating a ton of waste as well with light bulbs. We know light bulbs are one of those things that when we throw them out, we can't just even put them in the garbage. There's a specific way we have to dispose of our light bulbs, right? To the point that actually it took a couple of years for all of the companies to get on the same page because they had to worsen their light bulbs from where they had gotten to in terms of how many kilowatt hours they burned. They were at 2000, I think, and they actually dialed it back to like 1800, I want to say. But again, there's a light bulb in California that's been burning for over 100 years, and no one wants to take it apart to find out why either, because then it could stop burning and we might not actually figure out why. The other part of this is psychological or perceived obsolescence. And the story here that they talked about in this podcast in particular is Alfred P. Sloan, and he was working with Chevrolet or General Motors. At the time, cars were pretty new. But when you were looking at what Ford was doing, they were offering one car, like one model, and it was in black. And that was it. What Alfred P. Sloan did is he started thinking, well, why don't you offer cars in different colors and with different add-ons? And so then cars became a bit of a fashion statement. People could tell the last time you bought a car based off the color your car was. Cars became something that were a part of your identity, right? What car you chose. And so it added on this idea of a perceived or psychological obsolescence, that something is out of date, out of style, out of fashion. At the same time, we also had shifts in how we consume goods and services. So before, you had craftspeople that were masters at their craft, right? If you had someone making your shoes, they had been doing this for decades. They knew how to do it and they knew how to repair it. That changed when we brought in manufacturing in the Industrial Revolution. We were able to make things at a much larger scale, not necessarily with the same craftsmanship. And eventually it reached economies of scale, where while things were manufactured before, a lot of people still were employed in making quality goods and could still repair the things that were being manufactured. Once you hit economies of scale, things were being produced at such a low, at a price that was so low, even these people who knew how to repair them, that repair was now equal to the price of replacing those items. And in some cases, it's now more expensive to repair something than to replace it. And so then you introduce these competing priorities as well, for whether someone wants something that's durable and quality or something that's affordable and accessible. And again, you get to this aspect of fast fashion, for instance, where we're changing our clothes very quickly because we're trying to broadcast our identity through the things that we wear, through our belongings. And so what is the circular economy? The idea is we're trying to get out of this waste bin. And so different ways, these are some of the actions for how you get there, that from using, you could reuse it. You can repair it if it breaks, so you can continue using it. You can return it maybe if it's not something that you're using anymore or as much. And you can recycle, and ideally it's stuff that you actually can recycle and can go towards making new things again. So at each stage in a circular economy, we're considering the inputs and outputs, what materials and resources are going into the making and manufacture of that product, what byproducts are coming out at each stage, and what is the final product. And then you're also thinking about end of life strategies. So how can any waste or byproduct be looped back into that system and used as a resource again? How many times can it be looped back? And this is a critical question when you're talking about things like plastic and even glass. How many times can that be looped back to be reused? And when the product reaches its end of life, how does it feed back into the system? Is it going back to that manufacturer? Is it going back to regenerating your resources? And also, how does it get back into that system too? And we'll get to that later. The circular economy is important. We talk about a lot in terms of waste. I really want to talk about it as well as a climate solution. For instance, the city's circular economy action plan focuses a lot on our emissions from energy, buildings, transportation, which is fantastic, right? We need total current emissions, 55% of that is from energy. However, there's a whole big part of our emissions that we've essentially outsourced as we've outsourced our manufacturing. 45% of our emissions is coming from producing and consuming our products. And so when we're talking about the circular economy, what we're talking about is making less. And so as you make less, hopefully that 45% goes down. What does this look like in practice? And I'm going to use Bosch washing machine as an example here. So at the beginning, you're designing for the environment, and resource efficiency and we'll get to why it's so important to talk about design, of course. Then when the product goes out to the user, a user can own it, but maybe they also lease it from Bosch, right? And so whenever it needs to go back for repair, whatnot, that's actually covered by the company, similar to how you would lease a car. Maybe you're sharing that laundry machine. And I think many of us have lived in apartments or maybe a dorm at some point in time. Sharing a washing machine is not, a groundbreaking model, but it's very useful. And how can that sharing be expanded, right? When you use it, how many times are you using it, and introducing servicing to that? And once you're done with the product, how can it be brought back into the company? And so when it's returned, it could be refurbished and resold again. And if it's returned and it maybe it's past functioning, it can be mined for all of those materials to be recovered and used once more. And I just love that they put this all in a diagram. It's a great way to think of how a single company can go fully circular. And so this emphasis on design and collaboration, the reason why I bring it up, sorry, just lost my screen for a second there. Everyone can still see, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the reason why I emphasize design is that 80% of our environmental impact is decided at the design stage. And when you're looking at the circular economy as well, 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions happen in the production of these things. And so the reason why the group that I work for, Share Use Repair Initiative, focuses on these inner loops is because we want to focus on the extension of product lifetimes, because we want to minimize how many things are being produced. And so when you're designing for circularity, I've addressed some of this stuff. You want to think about materials that can be looped multiple times or putting in a regenerative system. But you also have questions about longevity and durability. How do you design for something to be repairable? So for instance, with smartphones, there's an organization called Fairphone that uses a modular design. Someone apparently has one, which is hard to do in Canada because they're available in Europe. They're harder to get over here. Awesome. And then you also want to be able to design for disassembly too, which gets into how are these products put together. I do want to also, I brought up competing priorities, and I wanted to highlight that with the longevity and durability, that certain industries used to design for durability. And I used to work in the outdoor gear industry, and durability is often a high priority in that industry. But as ultralight backpacking became more popular, you also had this competing design priority for designing for lightweightness, which often is not going to get you to the most durable product because you're designing for the weight. As well, this phase, you're designing to close the loops. And I want to emphasize that it's not always on a single company to be closing every single one of these loops. A circular economy happens within a system. It's the result of collaboration between multiple businesses and often a lot of nonprofits and charities working together to create that system. So you have startups filling these innovation gaps. They're disrupting the system. They're coming up with different ideas. You have businesses developing different goods and services, leading in circular procurement sometimes, being able to partner and provide resources to maybe smaller organizations to go circular. You have government adding in this policy aspect. And I want to highlight, for instance, the reason deconstruction, we can talk about deconstruction in Vancouver is because of a bylaw that the city of Vancouver has, that all buildings prior to 1950 can't be demolished, they need to be deconstructed. You also need support from banks, foundations, and more folks that can invest in that system, universities and other academic partners doing research, and then of course citizens. And it's not just about the consumer demand, but it's actually creating that culture in the first place, that this is habitual, that this is something that's just something you do without thinking. And then I also wanted to highlight the circular economy opens up different ideas of what our economy is and how goods and services exchange. It's not necessarily a business as usual type of system. It opens up new models like leasing or renting products from a company. You can have peer-to-peer rentals where people list their own items that they're not using a whole lot and others can rent them. I used to work for a company that did that. And power washers were an extremely popular item come spring because not everyone wants to invest in a power washer, but once that winter muck starts showing up, you want to get it away. And then there's also subscription services. So for instance, this is popular, especially for kids that are growing, that they're growing fast, and being able to have a subscription service for their clothing is fantastic. It also opens up the commons again, that we start borrowing from people again, that we start getting to know our neighbors and our community and the resources that we hold collectively. There's also bartering. There's an app that was developed in Toronto that I know is quite popular here called Buns, where you get to trade items. You list things you no longer want. You make a list of the things you're looking for, and you can set up trades with people. Similarly, there are, I think, over 40 buy nothing groups in the Vancouver area where people, can barter, borrow, and oftentimes also provide mutual aid. Maybe you're teaching a skill in exchange for a product. And so the circular economy links into a lot of these other different ideas of what our next economy is. There are some hidden considerations here. So what are the economics of used versus virgin materials, for instance? In some cases, the virgin materials are cheaper to use, right? They don't require as much processing. As well, one thing that I think about a lot is how convenient and easy a single stream recycling system could be, that you just put it all in one bin and that's how you recycle. However, that also really messes with the value of the materials going into that single stream then. The value of your paper recycling in particular goes down dramatically when you're mixing it with liquids and other types of stuff that might be coming from the plastic bottles you're recycling in the same system. And so there's an economics here that often isn't talked about, but can be really hard for recyclers or waste managers when they're trying to sell the goods that they've collected to recycle. And so I love this diagram because it's showing how that value is preserved through these different actions. And you see when you get down to recycling, the value you're preserving in these products and materials has gotten to the lowest. Your highest material is when you can keep reusing something the way it's made or when you refurbish it, so it's more or less the same stuff, then remanufacturing, taking those materials to make something new. But when you're breaking down those materials to their base parts again to be recycled, there's not a whole lot of value preserved there anymore. Some other considerations is this is going to require certain types of changes to our infrastructure. How do we collect this stuff back? How do we create those systems? And so you get into this idea of reverse logistics, and there's a lot of exciting technology coming out right now for how do you collect things again once they're done. And we're already seeing innovations like this in Vancouver with different grocery systems, for instance, or takeout systems. I also want to talk about plastics because a lot of the times they are made the enemy in these conversations. But plastics have become this widespread for a reason. They are incredibly versatile, incredibly durable, and therefore are very useful across a lot of industries. And so we need to think very critically about the areas that are really set up well, that those plastics are not bringing in a value add, that they're not bringing in a value that can't be discovered in a different material, whereas other industries, particularly, for instance, in hospitals, medical areas, certain types of scientific research, there's not always as many, although, and I'm not going to say you can't get rid of plastics in a lot of ways in those systems, but there are places that we have to think about where plastics are going to keep being used and how do we create systems around that. There's also trade-offs in some of this. And one of the speakers during today, I don't remember if he's already gone or not, but is folks from Loop Mission, and they do amazing circularity around food. One of the things they do being cold pressed juices, and you might have seen their juices at different grocery stores or cafes around Vancouver. Those juices are coming from produce seconds. They are packaged in a plastic bottle, and it was always weird to me why they chose a plastic bottle when they're so circular in their food. Why wasn't that translating to their packaging here? And the reason there is, it was how long can that juice keep? And they're able to pressurize a plastic bottle so that cold pressed juice keeps for longer and can be sold, and that it doesn't end up going to more food waste in a plastic bottle that they can't achieve in different packaging. And so there are different trade-offs within the circular economy that I don't think we should shy away from. Some of the other ones being as well, there are also trade-offs around designing for the long term and always being innovative. How do you innovate when you're also trying to create products that actually last? There's trade-offs also around quality and affordability that I think no matter what, you're looking at a certain amount of time period, that some of this stuff isn't going to be as affordable or accessible if you're aiming for a certain type of quality produced by workers in fair conditions. There's also shareholders versus stakeholders, et cetera, a lot of different stuff there. And then there's this idea of what is economic success in the circular economy. And I think we need to change our ideas that the circular economy isn't aiming for a high GDP, you know, and in a lot of ways, our economy, GDP is a metric of how much production is happening. The circular economy is trying to reduce production, ideally, or make sure that that production is not creating waste. But at what point did our economy, did that metric become actually the goal of our economies? And what do we need to make the goal? I can definitely tell you my opinion, of course, but just food for thought. And I also want to talk about the circular economy within a just transition, especially because a program that I now lead is the Just Circular Recovery and Transition with Share Use Repair. And I want to talk about this because we know that we can create inclusive jobs for all skills and income levels and also support more affordable daily living. This trade-off between quality and affordability exists in some areas, but in a lot of areas, the circular economy, people have been doing it for, I want to emphasize, the circular economy is not new. People have been sharing and borrowing from each other. They've been reusing the things that they have to make do. They've been repairing for ages. And oftentimes it's happening in communities that are facing affordability challenges. So we know that this is a way to make certain things more affordable and accessible. But those communities aren't always represented in these conversations. And that's definitely something that needs to improve. And we're hoping to meaningfully engage more with those communities to realize this stuff. Some examples of that locally is Love the Grub. They're making chutneys and spreads from produce seconds, but they also have an employee training program for refugee women and immigrants. Refugee and immigrant women, sorry. Similarly, Woodshop Co-op makes different things, largely furniture from reclaimed wood, and also employs folks with barriers. So for us, our tagline is, if we make the most of things, and what we believe is it ends up creating shared and lasting prosperity for people and planet.